right now, as you listen to this, the cells in your brain are quietly leaking a highly reactive biological byproduct.
Yeah, it's pretty wild to think about.
It really is. And, if you don't allow a very specific cluster of neurons to trigger this massive mechanical cleanup operation tonight, well, that accumulating cellular waste is going to start damaging your neural circuitry.
I mean, it sounds like the premise of a science fiction thriller, honestly, but it is actually the fundamental reality of human biology.
Right.
We have this deep-seated cultural tendency to view sleep as a passive state. We treat our brains like smartphones,
Yeah, just plug it in and power down.
Exactly. We assume we just plug ourselves in, the screen goes black, and the machine sits totally dormant until the alarm goes off.
But the truth of what is happening inside your skull when you close your eyes is intensely, shockingly active. And, well, decoding that hidden biological architecture is our mission for today.
Yeah, and it is such an important mission for anyone listening.
Definitely. Welcome to this custom deep dive. We have gathered an incredibly comprehensive stack of sources for you today. We're looking at the absolute latest 2024 to 2026 sleep science from institutions like Oxford and Columbia.
Not to mention some groundbreaking experimental studies published in journals like Nature.
Yeah, the data is just incredible. The goal here is to completely reframe how you view your rest. We're going to look at the cellular triggers that actually force us into unconsciousness.
Right, and we'll examine the very real cognitive fallout of the global sleep epidemic.
And, of course, we'll break down the actionable, evidence-based tools you can use to structurally fix your sleep. Because to truly fix it, you have to understand the roller coaster you are strapping into every night.
That's a great way to put it. It really is a roller coaster. A typical adult goes through 4 to 6 sleep cycles, and each cycle lasts about 90 minutes.
Right. It's this highly choreographed descent and ascent. You start with N1, which is that transitional super light sleep.
Yeah, the stage where you're barely under.
Exactly. And for anyone who has ever jolted awake feeling like they were falling, those hypnic jerks, well, those happen right here.
Which happens because your brain is systematically shutting down your motor cortex while you are still semi-conscious.
Oh, so your brain is turning off the muscles, but you're still kind of awake?
Exactly. Your brain waves are decelerating, but the transition isn't always perfectly smooth, so you get that sudden muscular misfire.
That makes total sense. From there, you drop into N2, which is true sleep. And for you listening, if you are someone who constantly wants to learn and absorb new information, N2 is arguably the most critical stage.
Absolutely. This is where your brain starts producing these rapid, high-frequency bursts of electrical activity called sleep spindles.
But what I want to know is how a burst of electricity actually locks into memory.
Right. So think of a sleep spindle as a high-speed data transfer.
Yeah.
Throughout the day, you take in new information, but it is fragile. It's just sitting in a temporary holding area in your brain called the hippocampus.
Like a biological clipboard.
Yeah, perfect analogy. During N2 sleep, those sleep spindles are your brain literally replaying the neural firing patterns of whatever you learned that day. And it fires them over and over at incredible speeds.
Wow.
This physically transfers the information out of the fragile hippocampus and hardwires it into the cortex for permanent long-term storage.
So you are essentially practicing what you learned biologically in your sleep.
Exactly. You are cementing the data.
That's amazing. And then after that data transfer, you plunge into N3, which is deep sleep. This is where the slow, incredibly powerful delta waves take over.
Right, and your breathing slows down, your blood pressure drops, and your pituitary gland releases growth hormone.
So this stage is entirely dedicated to structural physical repair, right?
Yeah.
Building bone, fixing muscle tissue, bolstering the immune system.
It is the ultimate maintenance mode. Try waking someone up when they are generating those massive delta waves. It is nearly impossible.
And if you do wake them up, they're just completely out of it.
Yeah, they suffer from severe sleep inertia. They are profoundly disoriented because their brain was deep in the middle of fundamental biological maintenance.
Right. And finally, rounding up that 90-minute loop, you ascend into REM sleep, rapid eye movement.
Which is such a bizarre state when you look at the brain waves.
It really is, because your brain activity actually spikes to levels almost identical to when you are awake, but your body is completely paralyzed.
Right. This is the dreaming stage, which the sources note is vital for emotional regulation and creative problem solving.
Okay, let's unpack this. How does our body actually know when to initiate this massive nightly operation? I mean, how does it start the roller coaster?
Well, the sources break this down using the two-process model.
Right, process S and process C.
Exactly. Process S is your sleep drive, which you can visualize as a pressure cooker, and process C is your circadian rhythm, which acts like a digital timer.
Let's look closely at the mechanics of those two, starting with the pressure cooker. Process S is driven by the accumulation of a chemical called adenosine, right?
Yes, adenosine. From the exact second you wake up in the morning, adenosine starts building up in your brain.
Every single hour you are awake.
Every hour, the chemical pressure increases. By the end of the day, that pressure cooker is just full of steam.
And then you have process C, your 24-hour internal clock. That timer is located in a tiny cluster of thousands of cells in your hypothalamus.
And it is highly responsive to light and darkness.
So when the sun goes down, the timer signals that it's time to release melatonin. And if the adenosine pressure in the cooker is simultaneously high enough, boom, you fall asleep.
What's fascinating here is a 2025 breakthrough on the precise mechanism of falling asleep.
Oh, this part of the research blew my mind.
It's incredible. For decades, the medical assumption was that sleep onset was a gradual fade, much like slowly turning down a dimmer switch in a dining room.
Right.
You get drowsy, your awareness fades, and you eventually drift off.
But wait, I definitely feel a gradual fade when I'm lying in bed. I can feel myself slowly drifting.
Sure, you feel subjective drowsiness, but neurologically, the transition is anything but gradual. The researchers found that humans reach a very precise mathematical tipping point.
A tipping point.
Yeah. Localized networks in your brain might start slowing down, but you remain functionally awake until a critical mass is reached. Once you cross that biological threshold, the brain abruptly snaps into global synchrony.
Wow.
You don't drift into sleep, you fall off a neurological cliff.
That dramatically changes how we treat sleep disorders, doesn't it? If there is a distinct neurological cliff, we aren't just trying to make someone generally tired. We are trying to find out what is preventing them from crossing that specific tipping point.
Exactly. We have to find out what is holding them back from the edge of the cliff.
But that brings us to the core mystery of this whole deep dive. We know adenosine builds up the pressure, but what is actually happening inside our cells to create that pressure?
Right, what's the source of the steam?
Exactly. What makes this 90-minute roller coaster so biologically urgent that we spend a third of our lives doing it?
Well, the answer arrived in a July 2025 landmark study published in Nature by researchers at Oxford University. And it all revolves around aerobic metabolism.
Aerobic metabolism.
Right. Every second you are awake, breathing, thinking, and just existing, the mitochondria in your brain are generating energy. They are the power plants of your cells.
But the process is not perfectly clean, is it?
Not at all. As these mitochondria work, they get electrically stressed and physically start to leak stray electrons into the surrounding cellular environment.
So our brain's power plants are basically tiny biological batteries. And if we force them to run continuously for 16 hours, they start leaking a biological equivalent of battery acid.
The battery acid analogy perfectly captures the danger, though the mechanism is slightly different. Those leaked electrons bind with oxygen to create what are called reactive oxygen species.
Reactive oxygen species.
Yes, these are highly unstable molecules. Because they are missing an electron, they frantically try to steal electrons from whatever is nearby.
Like your cellular membranes, your proteins, even your DNA.
Exactly. This causes massive oxidative stress and structural damage to the brain.
So the brain requires sleep to act as a specialized circuit breaker. It realizes the battery acid is accumulating, and once the damage threatens to compromise the entire system, the breaker trips.
It forces us into unconsciousness so it can shut the power plants down.
Wow. That makes so much sense.
The researchers actually identified a highly specialized cluster of sleep-regulating neurons that function as that biological circuit breaker. They actively monitor the levels of oxidative stress.
And when those reactive oxygen species hit a critical threshold,
these neurons fire, forcefully overriding your waking state. They cut the power to stop the leak.
But stopping the leak is only phase 1, right? Phase 2 is a massive mechanical cleanup operation.
Yeah, the brainwashing.
I saw this in the Mass General Brigham research, and it is just wild.
Using advanced trimodal imaging, which simultaneously combines EEG to track electrical waves, PET scans to track metabolism, and MRI to track fluid movement, researchers finally observed the glymphatic system in real time.
In real time. That's incredible.
It really is. During that deep N3 slow wave sleep we discussed earlier, cerebrospinal fluid physically surges through the brain tissue in massive rhythmic pressure waves,
So it is literally power washing the neural pathways.
sweeping away the toxic metabolic byproducts that accumulated during the day.
And the most critical byproduct it clears out is amyloid beta, isn't it?
Yes. Amyloid beta is a protein strongly implicated in the development of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's.
So if the glymphatic system is physically power washing Alzheimer's proteins out of the brain during N3 deep sleep, what happens to those toxic proteins if a blaring alarm clock interrupts that cycle, or if someone only sleeps 5 hours a night?
The proteins stay there, they accumulate and harden into plaques.
Oh, wow.
The structural damage compounds day after day, which is precisely how we arrive at the sheer scale of the global cognitive crisis we are seeing today.
And the statistics surrounding this crisis are just staggering. We are not just talking about people feeling a little groggy, We are looking at a fundamental breakdown of global health.
It's an epidemic.
It really is. According to the World Health Organization, 27% of the entire global population is living with a recognized sleep disturbance.
That's over a quarter of the world.
Right. And when you look at the workforce, 71% of employed people globally have called in sick specifically due to poor sleep.
And depending on the work culture and industrial demands of the region, it spikes violently.
Oh yeah, it's 70% in the United States, 78% in China, and a massive 94% in India.
The economic fallout alone from this is monumental. In China, the cost of short sleep was calculated at $628 billion in a single year.
That is $500 billion.
Easily. But, the financial cost masks the true danger, which is what sleep deprivation actively does to the individual human brain. We are facing an epidemic of the drunken brain.
Yeah, I read the cognitive equivalents in the sources, and they're deeply concerning. If you restrict your sleep to 6 hours or less for several consecutive nights, your cognitive performance degrades to the exact same baseline as someone who has been awake for 24 hours straight.
And that 24-hour mark is the critical metric, because 24 hours of sleep deprivation causes the same level of cognitive impairment as a blood alcohol concentration of 0.10%.
Which is well above the legal driving limit in almost every country.
Exactly.
We are putting millions of legally drunk, cognitively impaired drivers on the highway every morning for their commute and relying on them to operate heavy machinery or perform surgeries.
It's terrifying when you frame it that way.
But why does the brain fail so spectacularly when it's just tired? I mean, what is actually happening?
Well, a 2025 study in Nature Neuroscience mapped out the exact failure mechanism.
Okay.
When you are severely sleep deprived, the accumulation of those unwashed toxic proteins and the disrupted fluctuations of cerebrospinal fluid severely compromise your neural networks.
So the garbage is just piling up.
Right. And it literally forces your brain into unavoidable microsleeps. Your brain simply shuts off its visual processing and attention centers for milliseconds at a time.
Milliseconds at a time.
Yes. It is not a matter of willpower. Your conscious mind goes offline and you have zero control over it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I was reading through the stack of sources you compiled on what is causing this massive societal sleep debt, and I had to read one section 3 times because it contradicts almost a decade of popular advice.
I know exactly which part you're talking about.
Yeah. When we ask why everyone is staying awake, the immediate cultural scapegoat is always our phones, and specifically, blue light.
Right, the dreaded blue light.
We have been told repeatedly that the blue light from screens suppresses melatonin and destroys our circadian rhythm. But the sources reveal that the blue light panic is wildly overstated.
It completely disrupts the conventional narrative. An exhaustive analysis of 11 experimental studies showed that exposure to blue light before bedtime delays sleep onset by an average of only 2.7 minutes.
Less than 3 minutes of delay.
Barely a blip.
So people are buying expensive blue light blocking glasses and installing screen filters, thinking they're fixing the problem, when the actual wavelength of the light is barely moving the needle.
Yeah, the real villain keeping us awake is the content on the screen.
The psychological hyperarousal.
Right. It is the doom scrolling, the highly engaging short-form videos, the outrage-inducing news articles.
The content keeps your brain in a state of high anxiety. It triggers a stress response that floods the body with cortisol, which completely overrides the biological pressure of that adenosine cooker we talked about.
This raises an important question, though. Surveys show that a massive 89% of people globally acknowledge that sleep improves their physical and mental health.
Yeah, everyone knows it's good for them.
Yet, only 24% of people actually take proactive steps to fix their sleep hygiene. Why do so many people passively accept total exhaustion?
Well, the 2024 ResMed survey points directly to the arousal we just mentioned. When asked what is keeping them awake, 57% of respondents pointed to stress and 46% pointed to anxiety.
Which creates a terrifying bidirectional loop.
How so?
You are too stressed and anxious to fall asleep, but the lack of REM sleep destroys your emotional regulation, making you exponentially more anxious the next day.
Oh, wow. So it just feeds on itself.
Exactly. The research highlights that people with chronic insomnia are 10 times more likely to develop clinically significant depression and 17 times more likely to experience clinical anxiety.
17 times more likely. The lack of sleep feeds the anxiety, which prevents the sleep.
It's a vicious cycle.
So what does this all mean for you listening? We have mapped out the catastrophic cognitive costs, the economic burden, and we've debunked the blue light myth. How do we actually intervene and fix our sleep architecture without just resigning ourselves to being tired forever?
We have to move from understanding the biology to manipulating it. And the interventions don't require expensive technology either. They require behavioral shifts.
I want to start with one of the most surprising actionable hacks from the 2025 Columbia University data. They found a direct, rapid mechanism between daytime diet and nighttime sleep quality.
This was a brilliant study.
Yeah. If you consume 5 cups of fruits and vegetables during the day, you see an immediate 16% increase in your sleep quality that exact same night.
And the underlying mechanism there is fascinating. We discussed how aerobic metabolism creates reactive oxygen species, those unstable molecules stealing electrons.
The battery acid.
Exactly. Well, fruits and vegetables are packed with antioxidants. Those antioxidants readily donate electrons to neutralize the reactive oxygen species, drastically reducing the oxidative stress on the brain.
Wow, so by reducing the metabolic load during the day, you ease the burden on that biological circuit breaker at night, allowing for a deeper, more stable sleep architecture.
That's it, exactly. It's biological chemistry in action.
Beyond eating more produce, the fundamentals of sleep hygiene are about honoring process S and process C. For example, keeping your bedroom cool, ideally around 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
Why does the room need to be cold? Because your core body temperature physically needs to drop by about 2 degrees to successfully initiate N2 sleep.
And to anchor process C, that digital timer, you need bright morning sunlight in your eyes within an hour of waking up.
Just step outside for a few minutes.
Yeah, it signals the hypothalamus to set the biological clock, ensuring melatonin is released precisely 14 to 16 hours later.
You also need to manage the chemical inputs. Cutting off your caffeine intake by noon is non-negotiable.
Because caffeine molecules perfectly fit into the brain's adenosine receptors.
It doesn't give you energy, it simply blocks the brain from feeling the pressure cooker building up.
Exactly. And stopping heavy meals 3 hours before bed ensures your body's energy is directed toward the glymphatic power washing rather than digesting a steak.
Those behavioral fundamentals are highly effective for the average person, but we must address the listeners whose sleep architecture is fundamentally broken. If someone has been trapped in that bidirectional anxiety loop for years, a cold room and some spinach won't fix chronic insomnia.
That is where the medical interventions come in, but the sources are very clear that the gold standard is not medication.
Right.
Sleeping pills are only recommended for severe short-term use, typically less than 4 weeks, because the brain rapidly builds tolerance and dependency.
So what is the gold standard?
The absolute gold standard for chronic issues is CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia.
I found the mechanics of CBTI fascinating because they sound entirely counterintuitive.
They do, yeah.
One of the primary techniques is sleep restriction. If someone is suffering from insomnia and desperate for rest, why on earth would a sleep therapist restrict the amount of time they are allowed to spend in bed?
Because it actively weaponizes process S.
The pressure cooker.
Exactly. People with insomnia often spend 10 hours in bed trying to force themselves to get 8 hours of sleep, resulting in a highly fragmented, shallow rest.
Just tossing and turning.
Right. By restricting their time in bed to only 6 hours, CBTI artificially drives up the homeostatic sleep pressure.
Oh,
It builds so much chemical steam in the pressure cooker that the brain has no choice but to consolidate the fragmented sleep into one dense, solid block.
that is brilliant.
Once the brain relearns how to sleep solidly, the therapist slowly expands the time window.
So it is forcing the circuit breaker to trip through sheer biological pressure.
Yeah.
CBTI also uses stimulus control, which is about breaking the psychological association between the bed and wakeful anxiety.
This is crucial.
If you are awake in bed for more than 20 minutes, you must physically leave the room. You have to retrain your neural pathways to recognize the bed strictly as a trigger for unconsciousness, not place for doom scrolling or agonizing over tomorrow's meetings.
We also need to contextualize these strategies across the human lifespan because sleep architecture physically alters as we age.
Oh, right, the age differences.
For teenagers or the parents of teenagers listening, it is vital to understand that adolescents undergo a biological phase delay. Their circadian timer physically shifts forward by a few hours.
So they are biologically incapable of falling asleep early, yet modern society forces them to wake up at 6 in the morning for school.
They are essentially operating in a state of permanent biological jet lag.
That's awful.
It is. And on the other end of the spectrum, older adults experience a severe reduction in the amplitude of their delta waves.
So the brain struggles to generate deep N3 sleep, making their rest much lighter and highly fragmented.
For both demographics and really for anyone listening, one of the most universally potent stabilizers for sleep architecture is daily, vigorous cardiovascular exercise.
The caveat being timing. You cannot do a vigorous workout within 3 hours of your bedtime.
Right.
Because exercise spikes your core body temperature and floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline, which completely derails the cool-down phase your body requires to descend into the sleep cycle.
Bringing all of these complex physiological threads together, the overarching message from the current scientific consensus is unavoidable.
Which is?
Sleep is not a negotiable luxury. It is not a bank account you can overdraw to squeeze more productivity out of your week. It is the absolute bedrock of your cognitive and physical survival.
We have covered incredible ground in this deep dive. We started by mapping the 90-minute biological roller coaster, moving from the memory-locking sleep spindles of N2 to the physical tissue repair of deep N3.
We unpacked how your brain's mitochondria generate reactive oxygen species, triggering a biological circuit breaker that forces cerebrospinal fluid to power wash Alzheimer's proteins from your skull.
And we confronted the staggering economic and cognitive reality of the global sleep epidemic. We recognize that sleep deprivation forces the brain into uncontrollable microsleeps, leaving you as impaired as a drunk driver.
But most importantly, we looked at the evidence-based tools to actually reclaim your rest.
Right. From utilizing the antioxidants in fruits and vegetables, to dropping your room temperature to 65 degrees, to breaking the cycle of psychological arousal caused by the content on your phone.
If you take nothing else away from this exploration, the most practical advice is to pick just 1 or 2 behavioral changes to implement tonight. Don't overwhelm your system by trying to perfectly overhaul your entire circadian rhythm in a single day.
Just start small.
Exactly. Maybe tonight you just commit to leaving your phone charging in the kitchen, removing the engaging content from your sleep environment entirely. Or perhaps you focus strictly on anchoring your morning wake-up time. Taking those small, deliberate steps is how you rebuild the architecture over time.
I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to ponder tonight as you turn off the lights and let your body temperature begin to drop.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have established today that the very act of thinking, of metabolizing energy and sustaining consciousness, naturally generates a highly toxic metabolic waste that requires total paralyzed vulnerability to clean up.
The biological cost of doing business.
Yes, which forces us to ask, will human evolution, with all its incredible ongoing adaptations, ever find a biological workaround that allows us to clear this oxidative waste while remaining fully awake and aware?
Oh, wow.
Or is this highly vulnerable 90-minute cycle of total unconsciousness simply the unavoidable tax we will always have to pay for the sheer privilege of having a conscious mind? That is an incredible concept to take with you into the dark tonight. Whether you're wrapping up your commute or finally settling into bed, you now have the biological blueprint to let that circuit breaker trip safely. Have an incredibly restorative, well-deserved night of rest, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.